Hi, I'm Sam,
And I'm Andrew.
and this is Teens Talk Politics. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the District of Columbia, or Washington, D.C., and its path to statehood. As we know, it's kind of been a hot topic recently, where, especially under the new Biden agenda and Democratic Senate and House, that Democrats are pushing for DC to become a state, but obviously that can't really. We know that can't really happen because of the filibuster. But our first bullet point today will be the history of the District of Columbia, and its kind of impact in politics. And so, as we know, DC was created originally to be kind of a stateless, a stateless territory of the United States, where um, every all the Congress people and governors could meet and discuss these new ideals for a nation, and which this made sense at the time, probably, as DC's population was relatively small, and the only reason people would go there is to meet with other delegates. So, but eventually, it grew into more a larger a larger city and had more of a cultural impact on the rest of the world. And so, um, throughout throughout the time, DC's been trying to gain their rights, as DC now, as the time of recording, has a greater population than at least two states. So, um, yeah, what are your thoughts on DC becoming on DC's path to becoming more of a less of a federal governing uh, territory to more of a self-governing state?
Well, first of all, you said it has a greater population than at least two states. It's actually three. They have a greater population than the state of Wyoming, the state of Vermont, and the state of Delaware.
Really?
Pretty sure that's true. Okay. And the whole reason for DC, first of all, just to cover what Sam said, the whole point of it becoming its own territory is so that the not certain states would have more power in the federal government than others. The capital used to be New York City, then it was Philadelphia, and now, of course, it's the District of Columbia. And this gave the states like Virginia, Maryland, down the East Coast, they felt like they had similar power to each other. Of course, it's not necessarily true, because, of course, New York, more people live there, they're going to have more representatives than a state like Delaware. But the whole point of DC becoming a state is to divert the power of certain states, and that's why you have the Electoral College. So smaller states have a say, and so do larger states. So larger states like cities like New York, Philadelphia, Richmond, they don't counteract all the smaller states. But the fact that DC's population has grown just so tremendously in the past 200 years, to the fact that it has a larger population than three whole states, it's kind of amazing how they don't have representation in the federal government. I feel like no matter where you live, and if you live in the United States, you should get federal representation. Whether you live in Guam, where you live in the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, DC. I think it's important for Puerto Rico and both DC to become actual states because they have such a large population. Then having two senators, having a representative. It's been estimated that if Puerto Rico became a state, they would have 7 representatives. Or was it 7? Maybe it was 5. It's one of the two. Maybe it was 7 electoral votes and 5 representatives. I'm not 100% sure. But states like Virgin Islands, maybe they don't really have a large enough population to become states, but they still need more voting representation in Congress. Yes, they have a delegate they send, and yes, she was able to be involved in the impeachment, so she had a lot of weight there. But in terms of actual voting power, she's basically powerless. They can introduce bills to the floor, they cannot vote. The District of Columbia delegate, Holmes, Norton Holmes, she can't do anything. She can introduce the bill for HR 1, what's it called? HR 1, it wasn't HR 1, it was HR Sam, help me out. It was HR
HR
51. HR 51.
Oh, HR 51.
And she introduced this to the House. However, she could not vote on it herself. It passed the House, but back when they actually voted, Mitch McConnell filibustered it, and of course, if it ended up on the president's desk, it was Donald Trump, he would have vetoed it. Now, they voted on it in the House again. It's gone to the Senate. However, it was filibustered. If we could get Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema to let go of the filibuster, then we could possibly get this through to the president's desk and he would sign it. But I just think it's very important for people in the country to have representation. On their license plate, they have taxation without representation, meaning they pay higher taxes than almost every single person in this country. However,
DC pays the most taxes of any state.
Right. And they don't get representation in Congress. So I think it's very important for this DC statehood to pass. Or at least they get more representation in Congress. But I think becoming a state is probably the easiest, most simple way to get through.
Yeah. Yes. So with DC, so just to correct your earlier statement, it is DC's population is only larger than Vermont and Wyoming, but is very close to what would be North Dakota.
North Dakota? What's the population of Delaware?
But it would only be ranked. It would be ranked 48th out of. Oh, never mind. It would be ranked 49th out of 51 states if it was if it was added to the United States. But you were making a very good point about the taxation. With all these taxes going in and without getting a single votable representative in Congress, it's extreme that of the DC people that are what they're going through, because in the history of DC, they have what was I going to say? in DC history, DC has been mostly governed by the federal government, though the federal government, the reason this whole debacle is happening is the federal government doesn't pay too much attention. As we know, the federal government is governed by every other state, so with DC is basically governed by every other state, even though it's bigger in influence and population than at least a few states.
Yeah.
And so it's very controversial, and I think especially on the Republican side of this thing, these guys, especially the Republicans such as Mitch McConnell trying to block this, the reason that they claim to block this, I think, is from its historical significance as a quote-unquote federally governed district, and so they claim that they don't want to disrupt that, and giving DC statehood would allow Democrats to control the DC, and it doesn't matter when it comes to states' rights, right? Why are you to the Republicans, why are you all about states' rights all of a sudden, and then as soon as a territory wants to become a state, just so that they can govern themselves, not everyone else, you are suddenly so defensive about that. It's we know you're lying to us, but it's what are we gonna do?
Right. And yeah, so historically, it's been the Democrats that are all about state rights. But now that the ideologies, the political spectrum has basically switched, now Democrats are in the left wing, now Republicans are in the right wing. It's primarily Republicans that are caring about states' rights. Because Washington is its individual community, it's not part of any state, it's very hard for them to govern individually because they are not a state. And their local government with their mayor and the city council is very much overshadowed by the federal government that is in that territory, with the Capitol and the White House being literally down the lawn from the local government. So I really think if this becomes a state, it will help DC really govern as its individual state and help its people, help the government, the local government in DC take about DC's citizens' actual needs, not about the federal government's needs, and especially their taxes are so high because of that.
Yeah, and to the Republicans, right? You guys are always talking about these states needing rights, and you're talking about how like DC will be too partisan run. As you are blocking it from making its own decision, it's like you're being a massive hypocrite right now, Mitch McConnell. And so it's like, figure something out. It's like, stop being such a massive hypocrite and let DC decide for its own future, right?
Right, and it has such a high population. However, it has this partisan lean that is way to the left.
Yeah.
The reason you said, the reason they don't support this becoming a state, this would give Democrats 2 senators, and this would give them an extra representative. And that would
and with
tip
that,
the Senate
I think
to our
we
state.
should move on to our next topic, DC's position in Congress, and so you can continue.
Yeah, so this would tip the Senate scale, becoming Democrats would have a much larger hold on the Senate. For example, in 2022, that elections, it's a 50-50 tie in the Senate. We can lose Georgia, we can lose Arizona, and if we have the 2 senators in D.C., we would maintain the majority. Republicans would have to do a lot more. They would have to pick up New Hampshire, Georgia, Arizona, possibly Nevada, and that would barely get them over that threshold mark for getting a 51-49 Senate. So they would have to do a lot more. It's not much of a problem in the House side because it's only 1 seat out of 435, so it's not hard to see them overcoming that 1 vote. But this is their main problem with this. They're fine with Puerto Rico. A lot of Republicans, like Marco Rubio, they all support Puerto Rico's statehood, and that's because it doesn't have such a stark political lean. They have a delegate, and that's a Republican right now. Of course, he can't vote, so it doesn't have any power, but is a Republican. I think if it became a state, it would probably lean to the left. It would be similar to Nevada, where it goes Democrat much of the time, but every now and then it goes Republican. So Republicans would have a lot easier time winning elections in Puerto Rico statewide than they would in D.C. D.C. would be practically impossible. And that's why a lot of Republicans support Puerto Rico becoming a state, being the 41st state. However, D.C. would not become a state because of that partisan lean. And they're all just trying to play politics. They're saying, how can the Republicans stay in power? Like I said, it doesn't matter how these people vote. It's about not getting representation. And if getting representation means losing the Senate, I think it's probably worth it. And you're doing the best for the American people and the people that live where you're governing in the District of Columbia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, I mean, throughout history, though, D.C. has been getting more and more representation. I think statehood is the only way for it to become fully autonomous and self-governing, just like any other state. And all of a sudden, Republicans have massive resistance to this. Like, just because this is the final line that will actually hurt them. And so it's funny how they're all for individuality and state right and individual rights until it comes to hurt them. They take their partisan politics, as you were saying, over the rights of these people.
Well, I don't think we can deny it's not purely a Republican problem. Many Democrats would probably block a bill making a highly Republican district go to be a state, giving Republicans 2 new senators, giving a Republicans the new representative. Like, if they just wanted...
Yeah, that's probably very factual.
If they wanted to cut a chunk out of Wyoming and decide, oh, this is a new state, be heavily Republican, it would have like 1,000 people living there, but they would get the same amount of representation in the Senate as California would. But the difference, I think, here is that DC has such a large population. There's not another district, federal district, with the exception, sorry, not district, territory, in the United States, with the exception of Puerto Rico, that has such a high population that could become a state. I think Puerto Rico and DC have this population where it could become a state. Yes, it has this partisan lean, but that I don't think that should really affect your vote. It's all about what can I do for the people, like I said. So, like I said, I don't think we can deny that Democrats would do a very similar thing. However, right now, Democrats are doing the right thing. It just helped them in their favor that, along with giving people representation in Congress, how many people? 692,683 people that live in Washington, D.C., along with this many people, they can get representation in Congress. With the addition and the extra bonus that they're probably going to pick up 2 senators, they're probably going to pick up a representative depending on which state loses their representative to give to DC.
Yeah. And yeah. Anything else?
Well, I will say that Congress has become much more divisive, and the DC partisan lean probably won't change in the foreseeable future. DC has gone to a Democrat on the presidential level with their 3 electoral votes every single time it's been able to vote in a presidential year. Voted for Mondale in the humongous electoral landslide. I don't know if McGovern won it. I don't know if DC could vote back then. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it went for Johnson, so it must have been. But McGovern against Nixon, the political landslide there, he won DC by an astounding margin. And because of how divisive and that America has become in the past 20 so years, basically since the 21st century has become, DC is not going to change. But the population is going to continue to grow. More and more people are going to need representation in Congress. States like Vermont and Wyoming, both that are lower population, that have a lower population, their population is probably going to grow at a much slower rate than DC is. And there will become more and more people that need this representation in Congress. I think the more early we could do this, is the better. It doesn't matter what their partisan lean is, it's just about giving people representation. And like I said before, I think everybody deserves representation in the federal government, whether you live in Guam, Virgin Islands, or any other small territory that the United States has. Because at the end of the day, everyone needs representation, everyone needs the say in Congress and what decisions are being made at the federal level. Obviously, like I said, they probably don't deserve to become states because the population is so minuscule. But they could split their representative or something, I don't know. But, like I said, 692,683 people currently do not have representation in Washington, D.C. And like I said, that number is going to continue to grow. So I do believe that we need to get on board, vote for DC, statehood. Joe Manchin will have to get rid of the filibuster. Krista Sinema is going to have to get rid of the filibuster if we want to get this through. And I really think that there's more positives here than negatives.
Yep. Alright, that's very well said. Well, this has been Teen Stock Politics, and we'll see you guys on Friday.
Make sure to
Bye.
tune in. Bye.